Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We're trying to work through this YouTube issue. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go through a presentation here about our proposals of developing a new and updated state fire code in Kansas. I hope that's why you're here. If not, you might be a little bored. So, just to give some background to everyone, our office has been in the state fire marshal's office has existed in Kansas since 1913. This is not something that's new. We've been around for quite a while. The threat of fire obviously is something we've lived with in Kansas forever. The interesting thing about this, when I came in, I assumed that the reason the state started fire marshal's office and it was concerned about, fire loss and that sort of thing and wanted to prevent them was because people were dying. The truth is it was a money issue, insurance issue, even back in those days. The same sort of issues we're seeing now where insurance companies are pulling out of states or they're unable to provide insurance when people ask for it for certain areas, were the same issues some of they're dealing with in those days. The main problem back then was not just that there were a lot of insurance claims, but there was a lot of arson also going on. So our office was basically created at that to start developing some safety standards to really be a law enforcement agency to go out and hold people accountable if they were starting fires. So that's how it kind of came up. So just to give an idea of just some of the different things we do here. So we have 4 operational divisions that are forward facing to the field. Investigations, that is our law enforcement branch. Those are certified full-time special agents, law enforcement officers across the state. Their job is to respond when called by a local fire department to actually go out, investigate fires, determine how it started, why it may have started, determine if it was arson. If it's arson, investigate that, find who did it, arrest them, prosecute them, and go through the whole process. They also handle explosives and fireworks in the state, do those investigations and oversee those industries. We have several canines in that unit. You may run across them. We have 2 accelerant detection canines. So they're the dogs that go into an area after it's burned and can detect whether there's some sort of accelerant like gasoline, right? And the firefighters here will tell you it's not normal that you have gasoline in the kitchen unless there's a Harley Davidson in there that's half taken apart of that the firefighters find, because you would not be. I guarantee every firefighter's got into at least one trailer or one house where there's a Harley Davidson half taken apart inside. Okay, we also just added a human remains detection canine. Great program. And that's a dual purpose. That's a law enforcement purpose. So if a person is missing or there's foul play, whatever else, we have a law enforcement officer who can bring a law enforcement certified dog into the area to help put some closure, maybe find the body, find parts, all that stuff, right? She also, the handler, has a dual purpose into the next area, which is our emergency response division in our search and rescue. So we have canines also through a bunch of different agencies that sign on with the state for major disasters that can do searches. And so that dog kind of cross works that area. This has been a very, very busy area of our agency the last weeks. We were dealing with triple threats. These are the emergency response that handles moving fire trucks around the state when local fire departments completely run out of resources, when the county has no more fire trucks. We will move them 100 miles. We may move fire trucks from Kansas City to Dodge City, right? And then the state reimburses those fire departments for that time. How many counties have you guys been in from Shawnee Heights this year? 4. Yeah, you guys have deployed out a number of times. We appreciate that. Yeah. We have 9 regional hazardous materials teams that serve all areas of the state that don't have their own team, and that's quite a few. So just ran a call yesterday in Junction City with our hazmat team out of Manhattan. Just to give an idea, we're doing those all the time. And our search and rescue program. So the same day we were moving fire resources to Western Kansas, we were also pre-positioning water rescue teams in Southeast Kansas because potential flash flooding. And we had a search and rescue team working in Miami County after the tornado hit. So it's a very interesting area. Prevention division, that's the one that most of you probably deal with. Those are our folks, like I talked about, Amanda and her folks that are out there trying to make sure that we're following the best practices to keep Kansans safe from the hazards of fire or explosions or hazardous materials. And then the final area, this is a new division that we added. Initially, when I came in, industrial safety was under prevention, and that was just, in my view, that was too much for one person to oversee. There's, as you are probably aware, our prevention folks are very, very busy, and I wanted them to be focused on the mission. So we added an industrial safety division and split off our boiler inspection program that looks at all the boilers in the state and regulates those, and our elevator safety program, which is only a few years old. How many of you knew that up until a few years ago, there were no elevator safety standards? Talking passenger elevators that you and your family get on, unless you lived in Wichita or Overland Park, there was no requirement that those meet any sort of minimum safety standard. So our office, we don't ask for these things, but I'll say that I'm blessed with them. I don't know, but we've taken on that program, and it's been very interesting. Just to give an idea of just kind of the scope of how much we're dealing with, 426 different requests for us to go out and do fire or explosion investigations, around a little over 14 fire safety inspections done by our staff, more than 1,000 building plans reviewed for new construction or renovations, more than 8,300 elevators registered in the state that we're overseeing, and we oversaw 11,500 boiler inspections. So we're very active, and probably not in the areas if you're dealing with us just at a healthcare once a year or whatever it is for an inspection. We cover just a really wide range of things that I couldn't have told you about, and I'm not even talking about industrial hemp processing, because we regulate that too, and the paper that cigarettes are actually made out of, we regulate that. So these are the things we do. Okay. So let's talk. By state law, the state fire marshal is responsible for adopting rules and regulations that make up the Kansas Fire Prevention Code. And that's been in place since 1913. So from 1913 until the early 70s, there really were no national standards. It was everyone was kind of on their own to create their own safety rules. And a lot of times what we saw was rules were adopted after great tragedies, where we'd lose 20 or 30 school children because we didn't have smoke separation on stairwells, and they were stuck in the third floor of the school, and it was all an open. Even though the fire was in the basement, they were stuck up there, and they would have had to go down a stairway into the fire to get out, right? So we make a rule or regulation for that. What about having locks on the exit doors? There's the shirtwaist factory deaths where the owners had actually locked the employees in, and the fire started, and they were many, I can't remember the number, it's horrible. So a lot of those rules, what I'm saying, were developed because of what the fire service likes to say, they're written in blood, right? And so, but they're not consistent. If you went to any city or went across state lines, they were just a Kansas code that someone had grabbed, okay? So early 1970s, our country realized as a first world country, we had a third world. We're basically operating as a third world on the fire front. So there was a big study on the national level called America Burning. United States Fire Administration was created. A bunch of different things happened at that time to try to bring us into our first world country statuses for fire protection. Kansas adopted its first national code set in 1972. So the state fire code is nothing new. We've had it for a long time in different forms. The current code that we're talking about today, the last time the state updated this was in 2011. I'm going to talk more about why and some of the issues we have with that here later in the presentation. So that everyone kind of understands where these codes come from. There's a common misperception that these are some sort of a federal mandate. That is not true. These the codes are basically codes and standards are built by two organizations in the United States. They're both nonprofits, non-governmental nonprofits, that any one of you could volunteer to sit on one of the committees that writes these codes. And that's who works on these sort of things. Anyone here sat on an NFPA committee all right. So, there's the input from the actual stakeholders and the folks that are on the ground. So what these standards are I like to call them negotiated or consensus standards. Imagine you have a room like this, you have a whole bunch of different stakeholders sitting down around it, and they work through the different issues of threat versus what's available, what the cost is, and they come to kind of a negotiated middle of the road standard for the most part of how we go forth. And then this is put out for cities, counties, and states to adopt. There are 44 states that have a state fire code similar to the way that we do it in Kansas. That includes all of our surrounding states but one. Anyone want to hazard a guess which one of our surrounding states is kind of off on its own and one of the six? Missouri. Yeah, Missouri's out there. So I always give their fire marshal a lot of grief about that, you know. So, and that we got the chiefs too. So between that and we got that over them. So there's two different things. Just so we're kind of clear, there's codes and standards. Codes are those enforceable things that we do, like we have the International Fire Code, right? That's the code itself. Violation of that by law is it's a misdemeanor. If someone violates any one of the violations, could be a Class B misdemeanor with up to $1,000 fine, 6 months in jail. Now, how often do you think we charge people with that? I haven't seen one as long as I've been in this office, but it's there. It's a tool we have, and we reserve for those people who are really, really negligent, who are operating very clearly, violating life safety. At least in my mind, this is when that might come into use. We also have the ability to levy civil fines. Again, we use it very sparingly. If we're actually going to be dinged on a post audit here soon on we're not hard enough and we're not fining people enough. So I'll eat that one. I don't intend to change what we're doing. I think we're in the right spot, but I would much rather people take the money and invest in the safety of their buildings than put it in the state general fund. It's just my opinion. Standards support the codes basically. So whereas the code tells you how to do it, what to do, the standard tells you how to do it. And those standards are all around us in this room. How many different light or sockets do we see as we walk around? Do they all look pretty much the same? Is that just by chance? No, there's a standard for it. The width of the door that you came into, the number of doors in here, the lighting, the construction of the carpet that you're on, and how flammable it is. All of those things come somewhere from a standard, and we just take for granted because it's all around us all the time. The exit signs, right? Those are all standards. An exit sign looks the same pretty much in any place you go. So the rules and regulations that we adopt are called the Kansas Fire Prevention Code. And what's kind of an important point, those rules and regulations of that code have uniform enforce in effect throughout the state of Kansas. Cities and counties can adopt their own version of the fire code, the International Fire Code, and layer it on top of the state code. But the state code is kind of like this table. It's the minimum standard throughout the state that we have to meet. So as we're developing that, we're trying to keep that in mind. And what we're trying to do is find that reasonable minimum standard that's out there to allow cities to make decisions on and have as much decision-making capability as they can, because they cannot, whatever code we adopt as the minimum, they cannot go below, okay? So, and that's basically what this says to you. Basically, it's the same rule that you would have in criminal law or anything else. A state law, a city or county it can't allow something that a state code or state law prohibits. So where does this apply? I know we've got healthcare folks here, right? How many healthcare folks? Okay, great. Childcare? Great. We've got obviously the safety industry itself, right? Okay. Who else do we have here? Building folks. Oh, propane, of course. And propane accessories, right? Government officials, I assume. Obviously, we have Chief Flory back here from Shawnee Heights. Yep. So, sir? Oh, okay. Yes. Thank you for being here. So we've had a number of legislators come to these meetings. It's been great as we've gone around the state doing it. And I can talk more about that later, but we'll let that go. So where does this apply? This fire code, where does it apply? It applies to every building and location of the state where people live, work, or gather for any purpose, with the exception of single-family homes and duplexes. So if a building is used solely as a single-family home, or it's used as a duplex, two residences in the same building, then this code does not apply. It applies to every other structure in place in the state. Does that mean we go out and we inspect every building in the state of Kansas that's not a one or two family home? No. But this is in place as a guide, right? And if we do receive a complaint, we will follow up on it regardless of the different type of occupancy across the state. But generally, we only have so many folks, right? And so we kind of have to pick and choose those areas that we do enforcement on. Some of that is by our own choice, looking at threat level and safety. Some of that is based on state licensing laws, and we're required to inspect because the state has decided that some industries are a high enough risk that they have to be licensed. As part of that, they say, have to meet the state fire code. So that's where we get involved. So who's responsible for doing this? Well, the state fire marshal. It makes sense, right? Deputies of the state fire marshal, like all these folks here. But the part that a lot of folks don't understand is the fire chief of every organized fire department in the state, and any member of that fire department that is authorized or by that fire chief. So the fire chief, Chief Flory here, if he goes out into Shawnee Heights, has the same level of authority I do to enforce the state fire code within Shawnee Heights, which is district east and south of Topeka, about 190 square miles. I don't know how I know that. Might have been I spent 18 years as a firefighter there. So, but anyway. So I mentioned earlier that some of the areas of the state, some cities have chosen to adopt and enforce fire codes within their city. And so when we look at that, there are a number of cities out there that have fire codes that can't even tell you that they have a fire code because it was adopted in the 1970s. They've forgotten basically they have it. We found that about 40% of fire chiefs in the state, when we did a survey last year, we had an intern call, that about 40% of them were unable to tell us what fire code or if there was a fire code for their area. They weren't even aware there was a state fire code. So that's an education piece we're having to work on and really focus on. But these areas here, and I know it's a little hard to see, I probably should have done, the colors are a little weird, but the yellow diamonds you see throughout here, those are local jurisdictions that have chosen to adopt and enforce a local fire prevention code. So that's roughly 5% of the state of Kansas. The other 95% of the state of Kansas is solely served by the state fire prevention code. So the current code, and the reason we're here, the last time this process was done in 2011, they adopted the 2006 version of the International Fire Code. Is there anyone standing around in this room who does not within reach of them somewhere have a smartphone? Yeah, exactly. Guess what? This is before the iPhone was even brought out. So think of how much went 2006. So that is the standard that we're operating on the technology level. All kinds of things have happened since then, right? Our energy storage systems, lithium ion batteries are a huge issue we're dealing with that didn't exist. Our wind farms, and a lot of it goes along that energy type thing. And we don't, in our current code, have areas that we can really give guidance to people. Luckily, if you're building a big solar farm and you want it to be insured, I guarantee the insurance company who's going to insure you is going to say, you will meet X standard, even if there isn't one in place, even if Kansas doesn't have an energy standard or energy storage system standard in the fire code, they're adopting or they're using one. So we're very fortunate. Now, could a bad actor come in, take advantage of that? It's possible. Could someone cut corners? Unfortunately, a lot of times that's why we have to have rules. Unfortunately, some of these are because we have those folks that would take advantage of the system or take advantage of the rest of us. So in the meantime, though, it's the state was stuck because the rules and regulation process is so crazy. Notice I said that the 2006 code was adopted in 2011. So it took them 5 years to go through the process of getting a code in place. Our office attempted at least twice that I'm aware of between 2011 now to adopt a newer code. When I came in, we were 5 years into that process, and our attorney told me that it was in. If anyone's familiar with the rules and regulation process, there are a lot of agencies that touch it as it goes through. Our attorney told me it was at a certain agency. When we contacted them to see where they were on it, they told us they didn't have any codes, or propane codes for that matter, that they didn't have any of them. They'd lost them. There'd been a change of administration, and they had basically lost them. So we found him, or they found him again when they started looking. However, we decided that if we're going to have to basically start over again, there was no point in us adopting another 5-year-old code. We better just start moving forward. The problem is all these cities have continued moving on. They're doing the right thing. They're staying within about 2 code cycles. That's kind of the FEMA rule and the what's called the ISO, the Insurance Service Office, that rates fire departments and fire protection and helps set your insurance rates for your property. That's kind of what they consider. They need to be within about 2 code cycles. The codes update every 3 years. Okay, so what we're trying to do is get ourselves in line so that we're basically using the same language that our local partners are using, so it's consistent. So if you're running a business right now and a local inspector comes into your business and a state inspector, we have to come in because you're licensed to the state, they're going to be looking at your property on on 2 very different standards. Okay. A lot of it has to do, it's not so much the meat and potatoes, like I say, the safety stuff is there. They've rearranged it, they've renamed it, they've, a lot of different pieces like that. But they are going to be different, and it's going to be confusing, and people get very frustrated. And I understand that completely. So one of the things I've done when I've been here is State Fire Marshal these past 2 years is try to raise awareness, because our office was basically, and the fire service, we're talking about this, but no one was listening. So we have been very, very vocal about this, pushing very hard, and we finally got the legislature's attention on this issue, and they were good enough to put some language in that allows us to get a code process moving forward and adopt a modern code and be consistent across the state. So why is this concerning to us? Fires are down, right? There's about half the structure fires now in the United States as there used to be. Okay, since like the 70s, right? That's surprising. We're less fires, right? Guess what though? Your chance of dying in a fire has not changed. In fact, it's increased by 50%. So you're more likely now to die, even though there's less fires, you're more likely to die in a fire. So on the left here, you have a modern fire with modern materials. So we have our foams and polyurethanes and all the synthetics. On the right here, we have the old-fashioned, cotton, animal hides, all the things, wool, basic flooring, real actual wood, right? How much do we see that? Real wood instead of glued together pieces. Notice how black that smoke gets. That's because we're burning a lot of other different things, a lot of petrochemicals in there. It's also burning unevenly. And within about 6 minutes, that room is unsurvivable. It doesn't matter if a firefighter is in there in their full gear. No one's living through that. You're talking about a 1,000-degree area, okay? So flash over, completely everything in the room burning within about 6 minutes. I won't continue going with this, but what do we see here? We see that the fire, as it burns, it's not putting off that black smoke. In fact, I would walk into this room at this point. I can see how the old firefighters used to have their big mustaches and beards, and they would talk about throwing those up in their face, and they'd go into buildings. Whereas now, Kevin, you guys will tell him, we go into fires, and I've been in fires so dark that I have a thermal imaging camera up to my mask in front of my face that I cannot see because the smoke is so thick and so dark and so charged with all these particles, which basically you can light. If you've never seen that, it's just waiting to go off. It's scary. This will get to that point. This will eventually, if left, get to the point of taking that room, but it'll take about 28 minutes. So at the same time, we have less firefighters, we have less fire apparatus, we have less volunteers. So it's very concerning. Most fire departments are not going to be there by the time, most fire departments are not going to be there and be able to enter that room before it gets to that point. Unless someone was like there, watched it happen, and decided not to put it out and called 911 instead, right? If they, let's say they walked to the room for 2 minutes and it started burning and they came back, found it, and called, you're still looking at, even in probably our biggest cities, 4 or 5 minutes. In our rural areas, it can be 15, 20, 30 minutes. So this has already happened. That's why it's so important that we have our facilities, especially when we have people who can't take care of themselves, don't recognize danger themselves, they can't get away from the danger, that we make sure that we do some things to defend them so that on the front end, because we can't rely on the fact that the fire department will be there to put it out. And so fire sprinklers are a great example of that. There's a lot of good stuff. I wish we had the one up there, because what you'd see, anyone seen the demonstrator that we bring around with fire sprinklers, or that NIFSA has? Yeah, it's great. They do a live burn. They'll show you one burn without it, and it'll basically look like that within a very short period of time. And then they'll have the other side. And what happens is that single fire sprinkler, just like we have in here, not all of them, single fire sprinkler where the fire goes off, keeps that fire in check. A lot of times it doesn't put it completely out, but it keeps it there so the fire department has time to go and it won't grow. So it's very effective. All right. So here's our opportunity. House Bill 2739 was passed. It had to do with some other issues that we were having, because we actually had an orphaned definition in state law that was conflicting with the fire code and was causing all kinds of problems. So they repealed that portion that we asked them to get rid of. And then they also said, hey, we want to set you up for an accelerated process to get through and adopt a new fire code, because we understand that this is causing problems across the state. So our intent is to adopt a state fire code based on what is the 2024 version of the International Fire Code. That's the most recent version. We will be doing it, though. It'll be talked about as the 2026 Kansas Fire Prevention Code. What we're doing is if any of you have dealt with code books before, you can get a generic code book, or you can look it up online, and then you have to figure out what kind of amendments we made, or did we decide as a state that we didn't want to follow this section of it, or this chapter is not in there, or we've added one, and that's on a whole separate sheet of paper, and you're having to go back and forth between the book and our code to determine what's in there. So what we're doing is we are hiring the International Code Council to publish the Kansas Fire Prevention Code. Any changes that we make, anything we add, anything we delete, anything like that will all be in there, and it'll be available. So how is it available, Mark? It's available through, right now you can go online for free and view the International Fire Code in all the different versions and any one of the I codes. You can also view all the National Fire Protection Administration standards. They're all available free for people to look at online. If you want the actual book, it's going to cost you. And why is that? Because these are copyrighted. That's how they finance the ability to bring people in to develop these codes and keep that going, is they copyright and they sell the code books. So while we will have it available free online, if you want the actual copy, you'll have to buy it from International Code Council, just like now. I'm going to skip over kind of our timeline. I have a better slide I added toward the end that kind of talks about that. So what are we proposing in this draft code? Well, first of all, so everyone's very clear, we are not any retroactive requirements in there. So retroactive meaning we are not going to add anything in or leave anything into the 2024 International Fire Code that requires you in an existing building today to take or add something that you don't have right now. For example, the 2024 International Fire Code, as written, would require every building in the state of Kansas to have a carbon monoxide detector installed. Do I think that's a bad idea? No. Do I think that that's really something we should be forcing? No, not at this time, right? I think as we educate, people will voluntarily do that as they can. I don't want to force that on people and be that guy. There are some other requirements like that that are in the 2024 Fire Code. I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head, but I've been doing too many of these. So but there'll be no retroactive requirements. So um, so when do buildings have to do it? Well, there's really four. I have three up here. Four reasons. Number one, those of you who have a license know that Kansas Department of Ag or Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services or Kansas Department of Health and Environment, as their licensing process, when you license with them to do one of these different areas that are protected or a high risk, what they would consider a higher risk area, you have to meet the code in effect at the time you license. If you modify your code, if you go through and you if you modify your license, if you want to add more children, you want to change the number of patients, all those things, at that time, you're required also to come up to the code when you change. So that's how that works. For everybody else, it is the code that was in effect at the time the building was built. Okay, it's when it was built or when it was last majorly renovated or expanded. So this is kind of what we call the 50% rule. And we're going to be adding some language in, for example, on this because it's a really gray area. 50% of what? 50% of the square feet are changed? 50% of the value of the building? Is it the 50% of the value of the building as it stands right now before it's renovated? Or 50% after you put all the money into it, right? So there's all these different unanswered questions, and it's inconsistent across the state when you deal with local officials versus the state on how that's done. And quite honestly, it's not consistent even within our own agency over time. We're really working on being more consistent on what we do. The other one that comes up a lot is changing purposes. So I love this old building, so I threw it up here. Some of you guys have probably seen this on Kansas Avenue. It was originally, and those of you who've seen it, originally it was a wholesale grocer warehouse back in 1901. Okay, and that building in 2015 was gutted out and they made it into an apartment building. At that time, when they made that change from being a warehouse to a residential property, they had to meet the fire code that was in effect, put sprinklers in and do all those sort of things at that point to bring it up to the standard. Now, when we adopted 2024 code, do they have to change this building? No. They stay with that as it was done until the time comes that they massively renovate, change it. Maybe they change it back to a warehouse. Maybe warehouse space becomes really valuable again. I don't know. But as it is, they're good once they make that change. So here are some of the things we're looking at adding. One of them is we're taking some language from what's called the existing building code, and we're putting in there that's going to hopefully tighten up that definition of the 50% of what's a major change, what's a minor one, and when it triggers bringing a building up into the new code. We for one reason or another, and I don't know, maybe you understand the history from the propane side, but for some reason, our agency chose to take certain things out of the International Fire Code and go over and use the National Fire Protection Association standard as the code. So we do that currently with propane, flammable liquids, explosives, and fireworks. So we're in the midst of taking those things that are kind of out here and are very different than our local partners are using, and we're bringing them back into the basic fire code where they were in the beginning so that we're consistent on the language between if it's a city inspector or it's a state inspector. If you get a copy of the International Fire Code, if you're a city, all you basically have to do is put the name of your city in and the name of your fire department or your building official in, and you can adopt that code. It's made very easily for a city or county to adopt it. It is not made for a state. So we are amending it so that it's very clear that there are the state fire marshal basically administers the code and deals with those certain areas. But then we have layered on that, we have our local fire chiefs that have the ability to enforce this anyway in their jurisdictions also. This is an area we're working closely and trying to figure out with our cities. So I mentioned earlier that we don't have a process, or the cities and counties can't dip below. There is a process for that, and it's a waiver process that's in state law. So within going within the framework of the state law that we have, there are two ways that a person can go below the minimum of the state code. Well, first of all, it has to be in writing. It has to be a request to the state fire marshal in writing, and I can only approve that for two reasons. The first reason is it would be an enormous hardship for these people to do it. That gets used quite a bit when we're dealing with, say, the person who's decided to build a three center and wedding center in the middle of the farm field out. Right? For those of you who have dealt with rural water supplies, they're really good about giving you the water for your shower or to drink. They were not; those were never engineered or built in the beginning to provide a water supply firefighting. See the fire chiefs nodding at me because that's one of the things that a lot of your rural firefighters have to be very careful of is if they take too much water out of that system from those fire hydrants, they can actually cause the system to run backwards. They can bring in bacteria. And so they have to be very careful about any use of a rural water system because they aren't really made for that purpose. So we're looking at a way, how do we work with our cities to allow them to have a path where our office is the only one? Obviously, statutorily, the state fire marshal by law still has to be the one who signs off on it, but we'd like to enter of our cities that have well-developed code appeals boards that are made up of architects and engineers and local builders, and look at these things and look at maybe the needs of their city and say, in this one instance, we need to be over here and the state code's saying we're here. So this would be a process that we'd go through where we would basically delegate the right or for them to review those on our behalf. And then they would package that up, look at the reasons, see if it meets state law for those waivers, and then send it to us for final approval. So that's something we're working on. We're wanting input from our cities on that. Fire equipment businesses. This has been a difficult area. So how many building owners or operators here? Folks that have buildings? No? Okay, right? All of you pay a good amount of money each year to companies that come in and inspect or service or refill fire extinguishers or this sort of thing, right? And we do that with the assumption that they're acting in our best interests and that life safety, that fire extinguisher that you have in your business, that you've paid them to come in and make sure it's working, that they did it properly. Unfortunately, that's not always true. And we are in the midst of right now court action to ban a company from operating in the state of Kansas because of widespread fraud. So there are literally hundreds of businesses and hospitals and schools in our state who today have fire extinguishers, have fire sprinkler systems in those areas that they paid a company to do it, but that company did not have trained people doing it. They had falsified. They had their office secretary signing off that they had inspected the fire extinguishers and the tags. It was very clear that fire extinguishers that were supposed to be drained and then refilled had never been touched. So we're dealing with that. As part of that, what we're doing and trying to help out the industry, because the fire equipment industry will tell you, one bad actor like that sours it for everyone, right? All it takes is one bad actor to break the trust and create problems like that. So what we'd like to do is start registering, and at least we know what companies are doing business in our state. And then it'll be the company's responsibility to ensure that their employees are properly trained, and we have some way of ensuring that that's being done. Now, how does that look? This is like baby step into this. We're not going to charge any fees, but we'd like to know who's out there, have them register annually, have them certify that their people are properly trained and they're following the different standards. If we have complaint, then we can follow up on it, investigate, and take action. Okay. Plan reviews. So when there are certain types of occupancies in the state, when they go through and they modify their building or build a new building, there are certain types that have to be almost all have to be reviewed by someone. There are certain that are reviewed by our office, and there are some that are reviewed by the local level. Right now, every one of those that comes to our office has to have a stamp of a professional architect or engineer on it. So they can be costly, these code footprint documents. So since 2006, there have been other options out there. So NICET is one of them. There's called a NICET Level 3 certification that we would like to start being allowed to use for fire alarm plans and for fire sprinkler system plans, which should cut costs to the end user, but at the same time still keep the level of knowledge and certification in place. Family child care homes. So without getting into a big discussion, there are different types of child cares, different sizes. You know, we deal with everything from the 6, 7 children in a home environment to places that run 24 hours a day and have more than 120 kids in them that support, say, large refineries and things like that. So there's kind of a sliding scale on those of how they're regulated. So one of those are these family child care homes. These are those home-based, non-commercial for us places. Right now, they're operating under kind of outside the fire safety code itself. They're operating on a separate fire and life safety agreement between the Department of Health and Environment and the state fire marshal's office. So for those of you who are in childcare and have ever had the frustration of our inspector comes in and does an inspection, and then a local inspector may come in and tell you something different, that's because we are literally working off two completely different pieces of paper. We are working off two different sets of standards. So we want to bring this into the International Fire Code. Again, that's what our locals inspect to. We need to make sure that we're more consistent with that. I don't foresee that there's going to be any major issues with that. In fact, if anything, these changes, I don't know of any I've mentioned yet that will be more strict in how they're applied. Most of these will give more breathing room to locals and to building owners. Residential board and care, this is also a significant change. Right now, I had mentioned that Kansas, or our office, had chosen to move some things out of the fire code and into the National Fire Protection Association standards or in codes. One of those is our residential board and care. We have been inspecting and enforcing them by regulation to what's called NFPA 101, which is the life safety code. So we would like to move them back into and underneath the International Fire Code, again, consistent. And there are some benefits to it. Goes from 6 required fire drills per year, for example, to 2, going by that. So this, again, trying to be more consistent and looking at some of those things. And I can justify that today because our fire alarm systems, our fire sprinkler systems, all the different things that we're investing in to put in these buildings operate at a higher level of monitoring than before. You don't, in the old days, if you didn't need to know whether a fire sprinkler system was working, a human being had to look at it and check the valves, everything else. Now a lot of them are being continually monitored by the system, and they'll go into trouble mode. They immediately notify the company that maintains them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I don't have any issue going from 6 to 2, for example, on that. This is something we've dealt with in the state for quite a while. Conversions, and these are where you take an existing single-family home and you move it to use as a residential board and care. And for those of you, I should probably back up. For those of you who aren't in that area, residential board and cares are those home-like environments where people with intellectual disabilities or disabilities of some sort, majority of them are wards of the state or the court, or have been found unfit to make their own decisions. They are cared for in this home environment with someone there with them 24 hours a day, but it's a home environment. So we are saying that we would not require this single family home to be retrofitted with a fire or sprinkler system as long as they have 8 or fewer residents, and those residents are of a level that they're able to both mentally and physically, mentally realize when there's danger, physically get themselves, everyone out within 3 minutes. If they can do that, then we would not require them to retrofit that existing home with fire sprinkler systems. Assembly occupancies, this is an A2 exception. It's actually one of the most widely adopted amendments to the International Fire Code and used by a number of Kansas cities. So therefore, if we're looking for what that minimum is, this is something we need to include. And that is in what's called an A2 occupancy. Right now, if you have over 99, to go more than 99 occupancy, meaning not the number of people actually in the room, but what the room's capable of doing, you have to have a fire sprinkler system. We would move that to more than 299 as long as they have a full fire detection and alarm system in place, and they have additional exits from the building put in beyond what the minimum is. This comes up quite a bit. This is our mixed residential and commercial. This is the folks who are wanting to redevelop, say, the downtown areas. You have a historic or an old building in your downtown. Second floor of it's completely vacant. You're hurting for apartment space in your town, and you decide to invest in that. Now, we could sit here and probably debate whether it really is economically more feasible to put the money into a 100-year-old building, bring it, putting something in there and hoping, or what it would be to go out and use the same money to build a pad home for folks at that point. It's Kansas. We're not landlocked that hard here yet. However, this is something that a lot of cities look at. They're wanting to bring more down to their downtowns. So what we're looking at, again, and I should have said this from the very beginning, and I apologize. None of this is set in stone. These are just ideas. These are things we're looking at. We're doing this, and I'm going around the state and talking to people, so we get your input on it. We want to know what you're thinking about on these, or if you have other ideas. So these are just ideas that are out there. None of this is going to be there. These are just, we'll see what it is. This could change completely, right, by the time we adopt it. But what we're basically saying is putting up to 4 apartments in the second story or third story of a building, if your fire department actually has an aerial ladder truck. But it's, say, most rural areas, second story, but that has to have a fire separation basically between the commercial occupancy and the residential area. So fire and smoke, there's a 2-hour fire rating between those, and a full alarm system, so that the people on that second floor have a way to get out without getting into the fire area. It's completely separate. Their egress paths are separate, and so they can have that. So that's one of the things we're looking at. Again, kind of a reasonableness measure. How do we do that? There are new materials we can take advantage of in those. And one of the problems, it's not so much the cost of sometimes the sprinklers, it's that in our downtown areas, we just don't have the water capability or supply there. And we get that, we're constantly getting waiver requests from developers with documentation from the city of whatever, that they don't have a water system capable of supporting a sprinkler system in X building. So this would just kind of help us along on that. Portable fire extinguishers, any of you who deal with, let's call them uncooperative residents. This can be a lot of different facilities, maybe some of our juvenile care facilities. It doesn't make a lot of sense to put fire extinguishers out where folks are just looking to get in trouble. So this would place them, as we've done with waivers and over time, in a staff area where they're secure, instead of out with I won't call them inmates, they're young people being cared for. However, you can just think of the mayhem they could get into with that. We get a lot of questions about fire watch, when it's required. For those who don't know what fire watch is, if your fire sprinkler system or your fire alarm system fails, certain occupancies, depending on threat level, are required to basically have a person fill that requirement until it's repaired. Okay, so we're going to make sure that this tightens up a little bit so everyone knows what the expectations are, because there's quite a bit of gray area. Again, it's one of the more common questions that we get in our office, and there's a lot of, unfortunately, ways that it's been applied, both good and bad, that where we can bring that into a better spot. So this type 1 hood systems. This is a rural Kansas kind of an issue. Local bakery in your small town out here, they bake all week long. Don't make anything with grease-laden vapors. They bake bread. They do all the different stuff. But every Friday morning, they go and they fry up 2 pounds of sausage, and they make some of the best biscuits and gravy known in the county, and they sell out every Friday morning. And that's all they ever cook on it. Well, by the current code and the 24 code is written, they would be required to have a full hood system, ventilation system. They would be required to have the grease filtering. They'd be required to have that uh, uh, professionally cleaned, a bunch of different things, and maintained, and an extinguishing system. It's very expensive. It's not just expensive to have, it's expensive to maintain. So what we're proposing, and we haven't come into exactly what that is, but a limited exemption to help some of those organizations, those small businesses like that are only doing it, let's say once a week, twice a week, in a very limited 1 or 2 pound amount. That as long as they agree to have a Class K fire extinguisher, which is one for that kitchen area available, and they agree that they're going to completely clean that after every use to make sure that there's no buildup of grease whatsoever, that we would allow them to operate under this limited exception. So people say, well, Mark, as I get this question, they say, well, but what happens if people are going to misuse that? Yeah, probably some will. And when we go against those that say 3 to 5% of people who would misuse this, we'll deal with it. But I don't really think that I don't think we should be penalizing the other 95% because we're afraid of the actions of few, right? So this just gives us an opportunity, hopefully, to again be reasonable in how that goes out, especially when, and we didn't talk about this a whole lot, but when we get into some of our rural areas of the state, it's very difficult for them to even get people to travel in to do the service on these, and they may end up having to pay travel fees. They may end up have pay an extra day's wages for something that in a city would be a 1 or 2 hour job. For them, they're probably having to pay 16 hours for it, and because that employee can't do anything else while they're traveling to doing the stuff and going back. We have the same problem in our elevator program. Those rural areas, there's kind of a penalty for being in a rural area and having technology. All right, hood system flexibility. All right, a lot of schools, and I don't know, was anyone from schools here? No? Okay, we've had some. A lot of our schools, Topeka is a great example, have gone to a central cooking facility. So they have, instead of having a kitchen that's cooking food in every school, they have one facility that does it, and then they ship that food out, and it's served to students, right? It's kept warm, it's everything else. Well, all these schools still have these hood systems in there. And the only option under the code right now, they have two options. One of them is have someone come in and completely remove that hood system and pay for it to be removed. The other is they have to, if it's still there, they have to continue to maintain it and test it and inspect it and clean it, even if they're not using it. What we're proposing is a situation kind of between the two. We would tag that out for non-use. We would place an out of service sticker on it, or whatever else. We would actually tag out the device so it couldn't be operated. And then it could remain in place until such time as they decide maybe they want to start in 5 years. Everything changes. They want to start cooking again at that school. Instead of them going to the expense of taking it out, putting it back in, or maintaining it during that time, this would kind of put it in a standby mode. Red flag warnings. This one is something that we deal with a lot across the state. So the National Weather Service is another one of those great technology things, has developed the red flag warning system. Red flag warning is based on high winds. It's based on low humidity. It's based on just those. We can actually end up with humidity that where the firefighters, as we're fighting that fire and we hit it with a water hose, the fire will start back up again because the humidity level is so low. So it's very difficult for us to put out. These are extreme conditions. What we're proposing is that it be very clear that there'll be no burning in red flag conditions. When the National Weather Service says it's red flag, the fire goes out. You don't start a fire. If you have a fire, you put it out. So I will tell you that in all three of the large fires that we have had this year, well, the two major fires we've had this year, including the one in Clark County where we burned 283,000 acres in a single day, was red flag conditions and someone with a fire that was not being that someone had a fire in red flag conditions, right? The fire near Kinsley, a fire set during red flag conditions that endangered a town, right? Yates Center last year, what happened there? We lost a nursing home. We almost lost a bunch of people. Had the operative at nursing home that day not immediately started evacuating, when she smelled smoke, even though the fire was still a mile away. Had she not done that, they were literally rolling people down the road in wheelchairs to get out. The Cox cable guy was loading that people in his van and helping them get away. We lost that whole nursing home, right, in Yates Center because someone had a fire going in red flag conditions. So we just want to make it very, very clear. The statute is kind of ambiguous. We want it to be very clear that just like when we have tornado warnings in Kansas isn't a good example, but that at least a tornado warning in Kansas keeps us aware and we know what to look for, and we kind of it changes, right? We're aware what's going on. Same thing when any one of us then. We know that if it's a red flag condition and we see a fire, we know immediately that fire shouldn't be going, and we call 911. We get the fire department out there as fast as we can. So that's kind of where we'd like to go with that. Fire safety systems, and this is an area where Amanda, you want to talk to this one a little bit? Or I guess I have my continue, though she would do a much better job. So we're looking the semi-annual requirement for sprinkler system or fire alarm system testing, I'm sorry, and also looking at relaxing the requirement for the 5-year internal pipe obstruction investigation for sprinkler systems. So imagine you have a car and you were required by law at every 25,000 miles to bring it in to be maintained, and they had to look inside to make sure that nothing was building up inside your cylinders, right? Well, that's what this is. It's based on a time. At 5 years, you have to have this done. What we'd like to see done is a little more of we consider a common sense approach, that unless there's a sign that there is an impediment to the system, if it's not working right, if during the regular testing you see a lot of debris coming out, if there's some sign that it's not functioning properly, yes, immediately let's get that test done. But otherwise, we would roll that out to being 10 years instead, so that again, this is mainly for our rural areas of the state, that we just don't have those services available, and they're being basically penalized because they're in a rural area trying to be safe. We're making sure, and I kind of mentioned this before, any local amendments made by cities and counties, which they're all supposed to submit those to our office before they put those in place to ensure that they're consistent with the state fire code. As long as they're doing that and we have those, we are ensuring that any one of those that dips below the minimum, that we have those in place so there's no conflict. So that's because we've been doing this, we're out of this for so long. We're just going to take that as the minimum. Cities can continue to build on top of that, be more strict, stay with the code, but at least we're not penalizing those cities that continue to adopt things in the meantime, and some miscommunication and some different issues that went on there. We're removing some of the appendices from the document that we just don't deal with, valet trash and recycling. So in a big city, this is a deal. If you don't want to take your trash from your door to the dumpster or to the chute, you can hire people who come and pick it up at your door of your apartment and take it for you, okay? We didn't feel like we really need to regulate that in Kansas, so we're leaving that one out, for example, okay? Section 105, this is kind of interesting. So there are a lot of different permits in the code as it's set up. We have no intent at the state fire marshal's office to issue or deal with all those codes. I do not want to be the Oklahoma state fire marshal, where if you want to build a building outside of the city limits anywhere in Oklahoma, your building permit has to go through the state fire marshal. Don't want to be there, right? So, but we want those jurisdictions, those smaller areas that do not choose to adopt their own code, to be able to use this in their areas and pick and choose maybe which codes they want. So Shawnee Heights Fire District Board could get together and say, we're going to start requiring permits for the use of hyperbaric chambers, right? That's in the code. I don't know why you would, but hey, whatever. That then instead of them having to adopt their whole code set, they can just basically use the state code and then that local resolution or agreement to put it in place. So hopefully that will help. We are not getting involved in inflatable amusement device regulation. Did I hear a yay? Anyone from Department of Labor here? You know why we're not getting involved? That's their baby. Okay. So if you don't know, if you have a bouncy house and you use it for anything other than personal use, you bring it to the church for kids to jump on and everything else, it's required to be licensed by the Kansas Department of Labor as an amusement ride. Just laying that out there. Okay. Yeah, we'll just leave that be. This is kind of contentious, and we've been back and forth on our own staff on how to deal with this. There's a thing called an emergency responder communications enhancement system that is a requirement, not only a requirement in the 24 code, but it is a retro requirement for any existing building would have to have this. Basically, what would happen under the code if we adopted it as is, you'd have to pay someone to come out with a little detector who would look at what radio channel the local fire department uses and look at the signal strength in your building. And if it fell below a certain point, you would be forced to install an amplifying system throughout your structure to allow that. Is that in an ideal world? Is that great? Yeah. I there's a lot of things that I'd love to see us do, but the reality is, and in certain structures, I think it's important. Our office is going to be dealing with kind of a big project soon. This state-owned Kansas City Chiefs Stadium that they're going to be doing, right? So we want to have this in place to where if we can still use it if necessary, but at the same time, we don't want it to be an automatic. We don't want it to be a retroactive, and we want it to be something that's dealt with at the local level if there's a real need for it in an area. But because we can see some use to it, don't want to get rid of it. I will tell you that when you talk to 911 folks, a lot of times they are not fans of this idea, because the danger of it is you now have a private entity that has a privately owned system that they're maintaining on their property, that if it malfunctions, all my former 911 dispatchers back are going, yep. It can interfere with regular emergency communications for the rest of your jurisdiction, because it can key up and block up the channel. It can do all kinds of different things. So there's a lot of this one's kind of an interesting piece. It's a newer technology. I don't see us jumping in with both feet. It's just one of those things. So this piece here, energy efficiency. There's when this was being debated on the Senate floor, and I just wanted to go, no. One of the senators had Googled or whatever else, and it showed that using the 2024 codes, houses were going to be 20 to 25% more. Well, first of all, what's exempt from this code? Houses, right? We're not talking about houses, 1 or 2 family houses. The other thing is, this is a life safety code. We are dealing with, if it doesn't have to do with fire or life safety, I don't care what our level of insulation you put in your building. We are not adopting a state building code here. We are adopting a state fire safety code. It has other standards that we use, and one of those is the building code, but we only use it for those purposes, basically to support the fire code. We don't adopt it as a blanket requirement. You have to follow everything in the International Building Code. Okay, so what's the plan? Where do we go from here? Well, we're having these meetings, been out, like I said, this is my 10th around the state. We're going to have one more tonight, and then we're going to kind of transfer from this public input portion and information to really starting to get subject matter experts together to sit down, talk about what's important, what isn't, and start wordsmithing some things. So in order to get this before the legislature, for them to ratify it in January, we need to have this document to the International Code Commission around June 1st, with the intent of them publishing it, putting it all together, and getting a product to us, say by August, for it to go to the Department of Administration, then the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office can hold it for up to 120 days in this process. The Secretary of State after that, the Joint Committee on Rules and Regulations of the legislature will have a hearing there. Then we'll have a public hearing. That's where we're supposed to be doing this, all the way like next December. So we are trying to front load this process, so there's as much information out there ahead of time. To me, the rules and reg process is backwards. So we want your input on this. We want to know if you have ideas of how we can change things to make it better for you. If there are, I guarantee, good ideas out there, and we've been getting a lot of them. So I'll start off by saying, if you want to see what the 2024 International Fire Code is that we're modifying, this link will get you to the International Fire Code, to the free version that you can look at. You can't cut and paste or do stuff with it, but you can at least, if you're curious, go in and look at what it says, okay, what all those different requirements are. And if this doesn't work for some reason, I think there's an Android, iPhone issue, I don't know. But if you just go to iccsafe.org and look for the 2024 International Fire Code, it'll bring you right to it. Oh, sorry, let me go back. You know what, I'll cycle back on that, okay? So what I ask of you today, first of all, like I said, once we stop streaming, open it for questions. I'm here to answer, and we've got some folks here. If I can't answer it, I guarantee we can get other folks to answer it. But what we're asking for you are those ideas. And it doesn't just have to be here today. We've set up an email box that we've been talking about all over the state for people to send us their ideas, send us their comments, send us their issues. And so we can do this. We've had just in the last day, some excellent input of issues that we don't even know were problems, and things that are actually pretty simple to fix, but we didn't even know they were an issue in the first place. So please use that. Would love to hear more from you. And with that, we'll go ahead and stop the live stream portion.